find people here, which is exciting. I'm David Ahlgren. I'm a permaculture researcher and educator, and I also do large-scale consulting with water flow and really anything that has to do with tending nature, both of nature on the landscape of the soil and the landscape of our hearts and our minds. So we're here, and I'm honored to be here with Rising Light, which has been a great organization to work with over the years, who really just promotes good knowledge and peace. And so today, I'm actually going to teach kind of a little bit of a hybrid of quite a few different things that both Liza and Hal feel is very pertinent to this community. And I normally teach a 4 to 6 hour course called Permaculture of Human Relations. And I would invite you all, if you feel excited after this class, to find out when and where I'm teaching Permaculture of Human Relations, or any of the other courses if you like my teaching style. I will be offering a class. The next coming class will be at the Tradition School of Herbalism here in St. Petersburg. A lot of my schedule has been changed due to the virus disturbance within our culture. So yeah, stay tuned on my Facebook page for the things coming up. So I want to jump in really quick. You can leave questions as we go forward. I also want to stop in for a few moments and realize that this is a very serious topic. Community and building community and how we relate one to another is something that is both a human need and is part of the harmony and symbiosis that we need to have as a community in our world. And the sad part about it is us as humans haven't done a very good job at relating to one another over the past 100 years from my perspective. So from that, I've also seen that when we start to stop and take the time to actually step back, kind of like what we do with permaculture in the agricultural realm, is we step back and we observe. We step back and we look at the things that are happening. We look at the environment and we reflect on our decisions and how that's affected the land. We also look at the decisions of the people previous to us and how that affected the land. And if we were to do the exact same thing right now with how we relate as humans, we'd realize that, wow, we're really struggling. I really feel as though, and I see that throughout the past hundreds of years, we as humans have not created patterns of harmony and symbiosis. We've actually caused a lot of control and manipulation and things that I don't believe are in the nature and the harmony that we need to have as humans one to another. So from that, I want to kind of hold space in the fact that what we're talking about today is a very serious topic, and it's a topic that may trigger people. So you're welcome to just exit the class and come back and listen to it later if you'd like. You're welcome to share your feelings as we move forward in the comments. You're also welcome to ask questions later on, both publicly and privately. I love feedback. I'm also not coming to this as someone who's all wise and has all my answers. I'm coming because I actually failed at a lot of these things. And I realized my failures, and in permaculture, we call that a feedback loop. And I also have some amazing people in my life who have given me feedback loops of how I could better myself and also how I can teach. And I've also observed other people's failures and successes. So in this moment, I want us to really stop and reflect maybe on our entire life, on the decisions other people have made in our life that have affected where we're at today, where we're at in our pain, also where we're at in our pleasure of life and sharing and community. This is not only affected by the people that are really close to us, but it's also affected by the people previous to us, because a lot of times maybe our parents were given a pattern by their parents, a pattern of manipulation and control, a pattern of coercion, a pattern of not respecting a person's sovereignty and a person's humanness and the things that they really need and their freedom. And so because they were violated, they also replicated that pattern onto us. Also, not only just on our family level, but on a governmental level, on a community level. When we walk out on the street, we see and we learn vocabulary and patterns of things that are not harmonious with us and not harmonious with the patterns that we need to move forward in as a culture. So from those, we realize there's a lot of pain. And there's the things that we might have actually put on someone else. We might, or a child, or a significant person that we share life with. And that's a sad state. I know I'm a culprit of that. I look back and I realize the things that I have said or done or patterns of living that haven't been harmonious with the people around me. And so it's important for us to like stop and observe. And so one of the first elements within permaculture that we do whenever I enter, like whether it's 1,000 acres, and I love dealing with large amounts of land. And right now I'm dealing with a bunch of people sitting here and I'm a steward of that. And the fact that we need to stop and we observe the land over time. And so I would say the first element I want to share is like stopping and observing yourself over time. Observing both your pain and also the pain that you've put on other people, and realizing the things that need to be changed. From that, our culture a lot of times has come to those moments. If you think about history, we've come to, as American culture, other cultures, we've come to moments where we realize the status quo is terrible. I'm done with this. The problem lies in the fact that when we've come to those points, I don't believe us as a culture have come out with new patterns of relating. And it's true, especially in the realms of agriculture. A lot of times we'll realize, oh, wow, that's like literally destroyed a city because we built that dam, or it's literally destroyed an entire ecosystem because we removed the wolf. You know, we literally just destroyed all the plain states because we overcropped and overgrazed, and now we have a dust bowl. You know, and then we change those patterns. But what a lot of times we do is we're not observing deep enough to create new patterns of regeneration. So now that we've stopped and realized like the magnitude of this, I want to move forward into something else. And that's the concept within permaculture where we kind of come together and look at the kind of the pillars of permaculture. And three of those, a lot of times Bill Mollison says, earth care, people care, and fair share. Well, each permaculture educator kind of like brings in a different element a different way. And when I'm looking at the human element and the community element, I normally come together and say, first thing we need to do as a culture is stop and honor ourselves. So it's not earth care first, it's we first need to come complete and find the balance within ourselves, looking at where we are. And from there, we also realize that we need to respect and honor the sovereignty of ourselves. And sovereignty just means that we ourselves own ourselves. We ourselves control ourselves. We ourselves are responsible for ourselves. And from that place, we also realize if we're going to do that to ourselves, we also have to honor everyone else. And that's kind of a foundation of many different philosophies and education and methods that we have within our culture. One is nonviolent communication. And it stems from first us literally honoring ourselves and then honoring the people around us. And so that would be the first ethic, I would say, in the David version of permaculture of human relations, is honoring ourselves and our sovereignty, and finding where our boundaries are and our desires are, and then moving forward and honoring the other people with that, as though they have the same sovereignty as I have over myself, they have over themselves. And so from that, let's just say we change, like our culture just took that one thing, I think there would be a metamorphosis that would happen in a lot of ways. So that's the first ethic. The second one is care for the earth and everything in it. And so that would include the other people, but it also include the animals and the trees. And so from a place of completion, from a place that we feel sovereign and full and complete, or at least headed that direction, and it's a constant disturbance and metamorphosis, but as we move forward in that, we also, as a community, honor the earth. And then when those things come together, that's where the beauty comes in the third, and they call that fair share or sharing the surplus in permaculture. And so one of those elements is the fact that when we do those other two elements, abundance arises. So in permaculture, you know, I read the philosophy and I studied it, and I saw some elements through my childhood in my father's degeneration of land. I grew up on the island of Guam in Southeast Asia, and I saw a piece of land degenerated, literally a jungle turned into a desert. And then I also saw another gentleman who took a piece of land and taught me how to turn a desert back into a jungle. And I went back in my 20s. So I became an orphan, went to Oklahoma. I have a long story. Can't really bore you guys with that. Lots of adventure, and my phone is ringing. So then I went to Oklahoma, started a software development company, and got out of foster care, went and worked in Washington and wrote policy for foster care, and then eventually built a software for the Chinese government, built a software for a university in Guam, and went back to the jungle. And I saw that abundance that rose from the plantings I did when I was 6, 7 years old. And so in 20 years, a piece of land that had put a bit of energy into it with intention and design came out abundance. And so from then, I just decided, hey, I'm just going to buy a piece of land and get taught by the best guru and sell my software development company and become, like, figure out these things. And Jeff Lawton is my teacher, and he continues to be a person, a feedback loop in my life. And from then, I developed methods of restoring deciduous forest, especially in the plain states. But then I actually got asked to be the keynote speaker at the Northwest Permaculture Convergence, got all that done, and then my work just ballooned. Where this connects to the human relations is I had a beautiful project on the Olympic Peninsula, and that project was kind of like my pride, my joy. You know, it's like, you know, this is my success, and this is my I guess my toxic masculinity coming in. Yes, I've done this as a man, you know. And the sad part about it was I didn't look at the human element of this project. It was beautiful. We had piles of students that came out and restored this piece of land, but the land went into, fell apart. The relationship between the people fell apart. And I realized that I'd been always a geek of human relations, but I realized that should be a major element in my design. And all of us, I think as a culture, we're like, okay, we're gonna recycle, we're going to like plant a garden, all very great things. But where are we recycling and healing the toxicity within ourselves? Where are we planting those gardens within ourselves that we can come complete to that garden and have harmony with the people within the garden? And so I started to study it, and I started to see the beauty and the benefit of finding harmony and symbiosis. So all those elements that I learned within agriculture were very applicable within the human relations. I'm going to share like a few small little tidbits, and questions are super welcome, so we can kind of roll with those in just a few moments. But I first want to start with one that was taught to me through a student and observation, and I had been teaching in social permaculture, and I talked about how one of the elements within our relations as humans is respecting our sovereignty, right? And I just called that consent, like, hey, we're respecting their sovereignty. But I didn't really realize that there was a bigger element that I always taught in agriculture that I didn't apply, and that would be called symbiosis. So I stopped teaching consent, and I want us to like grasp the concept of the difference between the word consent and symbiosis. Now, consent isn't just a sexual term. It's true in business when we start to come together and dance. It's true when we work with a garden. It's true when we work with people within our home. It's true with children. All of the more reason to like teach them something beyond just permission. So this is my exercise on consent, and you're welcome to take notes on it. And the first element is we first, if we're analyzing, I'll just give you a demonstration of consent. Consent is like asking the question and making sure that the person has the free access to say yes and no. And if that's the case, in general, that's consent as it's brought together. Symbiosis digs deeper, and it first asks the question, hey, is what I'm about to do, and we'll just take a business, is what I'm about to do best for me? Is it really what's good for me long term, both physically, both energetically, both financially. Is this something that I'm honoring myself in? So before we're even asking permission with another person, whether it's a relationship or a child, we first ask ourselves. Secondly, then we say, hey, is this best for the other person from what I know of them? Are they free to give an answer either way? And how can I facilitate this question in a way that they can be free to answer, totally free? And if I don't know that they're free, the best thing to do is wait. Back to what we start with in permaculture is wait and observe. And so symbiosis starts to happen when we as humans start to relate in a way that allows for that dance to come together where we're honoring ourselves, honoring the other person, and creating that environment. And we do that in agriculture all the time. We're like, go plant a tree. Like, all right, I'm going to plant this tree. I got this kumquat, you know. I'm going to go out in the middle of, a lot of times people put it in the middle of these fields with drip irrigation, all these other things. And I'm like, what can we do in the human relations where we can apply it a little differently? What if we were to like stop and place our human relations more into a community setting, more like a jungle rather than a field with synthetics? I feel like that's where our culture is right now. We're in this, some of us are in the middle of a desert feeling all alone. We don't have any grandfather trees shading us. We don't have the bamboo around us holding us from the hurricanes that come into our lives. So we as a culture need to kind of create some of these environments. And the best thing to do is going ahead and setting the stage, setting those foundational patterns and allowing them to come together and create this harmony of humans. And it's just kind of like working with a greening of a desert or a barren landscape. It's not always easy. Sometimes it takes us digging deep. Sometimes it takes us digging and soaking, storing, and spreading water to allow that to happen. And sometimes it takes some time. And so that's obviously a really huge element of human relations, is allowing for that time to settle in. So that would be the exercise in symbiosis over consent and allowing that to permeate. Another element which actually arose from the Be Clear gathering was from a question. I learned so much from questions, so let the questions flow today. And that was a student, so I was talking about, you know, it's like a 4-hour class, so we're talking about some really in-depth things. And from it came a question from one of the students, and the student said, David, you know, it's great ideas, great concept. Yeah, it's like a great philosophy. And people were coming up with like deep questions based on their life. And the question arose about compromise. And in my class, I also teach that a lot of times within our culture, we have these things where we control and manipulate through these crowbars, these things of control over one another. And we manipulate by violating people's sovereignty, by finding something that they need, and we crowbar from there. And so this person said, well, what do you think about a compromise? And I was like, compromise? Ooh, that seems a lot of times within compromise, within the word compromise, a lot of times used as a manipulation tool, in my perspective. Now, the word, just like all these other vocabulary words, we could be like, oh yeah, that's the word that I really use. Well, so my first instinct in the class was like caution. That's like a big caution. But it really churned in me like, there's something deeper here that I really want to process. So I actually told the student, I was like, first opinion, let's just I don't see compromise within nature, but I don't know what the solution is, because I normally come up with these little cute little exercises. So I processed it for a week and I realized, first off, nature doesn't compromise. Doesn't compromise something. We don't bring ourselves down for the sake of another. Nature harmonizes. And that comes from for students of mine in the past, they know I use the word dance in nature, or dance together. A dance is like this flow we have together. Water dances, trees dance together with the wind. And we do all these things together. But when we're humans, or as we're humans, we have this tendency within our culture today, is just like, I'll give this up. I'll sacrifice this. But in a way, the exercise that I'd like to bring to you today is to ask yourself, if I'm going to use the word compromise, can I replace that in the same sentence with the word harmonize? And I would argue if you can't, then you need to run. And so any of my exercising my thoughts, like if anyone says, oh, I have a scenario where that's applicable, I'm like, great, let's discuss that. But I would argue that if we're not harmonizing, if the focus and the trajectory isn't harmony, and if it's one person everyone brought down for the sake of coming together, maybe the two things don't need to come together. I think when we take the time to harmonize, we don't go lower. We actually come bigger. Like the things that come from it are abundant community, and I've seen it. You know, sometimes like in permaculture, you know, I saw it as a child and, you know, in the agricultural realm, and I got to see this. I was excited when I went back to the food forest. I helped plant. And then when I went and I planted on 120 acres, a food forest and restored like depleted land, and I was able to see an exponential growth curve, a nutrient density. We saw all these things come together. I was excited again. But in human relations, I saw in my life a lot of struggles, a lot of things. But I also was able to kind of stop again and go back into history and read a lot and read about these little tidbits of time where people harmonized. And then what elements came together to make that harmony happen. And so those are the fun things. And then when I started to integrate those, both in my life and then also working with other people, I realized, wow, it's not like a, you know, perfect thing. It's like planting a food forest. You're always it's a constant struggle. But the elements of harmony came together, and I was able to see so much abundance, both in community built in my life and in other people's life. I also want to tell you a quick story going back to my childhood, and then I'm going to take some questions because I kind of jumped around here for today. Is in the islands, they have a cultural foundation of respecting the jungle. And so before you go into the jungle, you stop. You stop at the edge, like we're at the edge of this bamboo. If I was to go and like play in this bamboo as a child, you know, my Filipino or Chamorro friend would be like, oh no, stop. We stop before we enter. This was like built into me as a child. It's like this little culture. We stop and we ask the tatamona, the tatamona is just kind of like a gnome or an elf or a fairy of the jungle. And people knew that there wasn't the fairy of the jungle, but people stopped and thought before you entered the jungle. We stopped before we went and we peed in the jungle. We stopped and we thought about what tree should we pee on. So there was a stopping and observing. And I would say, if there's anything we can do within a culture, is start to create some of these foundational pillars of stopping and observing ourselves and stopping and observing the nature around us and the beauty and the nature in one another, and being willing to say no, being willing to make those boundaries strong and not compromising those boundaries. Another quick exercise, I said this the last one, but is the difference between a sacrifice versus an offering. And I would say, in general, I just work on not first expecting or asking any sacrifices of anyone. A sacrifice would be more like, I'm giving you this with the hope I'm going to get something back. So there's a crowbar, I'm going to get something back. But an offering is like, here, I love you, I care. Here, have this, be free. And so a lot of times, for people on this message here that some of you know me pretty well, sometimes I've asked you, hey, is this a sacrifice or is it an offering? Because if it's a sacrifice, can we just wait on it, or could we just like not have it? Because I don't want any coercion. But if it's an offering, we can give freely and we can share. I think an offering is a lot more like a dance between one another. So yeah, let's dance together in questions. So I wasn't able to see all the questions, but is there any questions people have? And I don't even know, I'm not a Facebook Live professional. I've been using Zoom a lot. So I don't even know if I can chime people in to ask questions, but if you've asked a question and want to re-ask the question, go ahead and just repost it in the comments below. I actually have like 4 hours worth of like notes that I could talk about. If there's anything, I know some of you have heard me speak before. If there's anything that you want to hear the story of, I can share those. Okay, question. How do you honor individual sovereignty and individuality within a community? That's a good question. So, okay, community. I'll give a quick story. Some people in this story may have been in this moment, but I like to first honor everyone's privacy. But I was at some community somewhere in the world, and I was actually charting water flow. And someone came out of the community house and was talking to some of the other people. Like, there was a problem, I could tell. It was pretty serious. And they said, hey, let's ask David his thoughts. I was like, oh, we don't know what to do. And they came with a very serious, like someone was very upset, and there's a lot of complications. And so they shared with me this person's upsettedness and such, and they definitely were not in harmony. And so I would say the first step to answer the question, the first step of honoring, this is what I answered with, first step of honoring this other person or any other person within community and building an honor of the individuality of each person is a foundation of communication, a foundation of nonviolent communication. If we create some of these patterns below, the respecting of the sovereignty and individuality of a person is a natural flow. It's kind of like within nature. So if we create a polyculture of full polyculture means multiple different types of things within the jungle, we don't have to worry about the nutrient flow. Nutrient flow is like respecting the sovereignty and individuality of people. Some of these things just kind of come together naturally. And it's really cool to see them just arise. So it might sound I'm just talking about a miracle bullet, but I want to talk about the importance of laying the foundation of communication and harmony. The second one is free access to enter and exit. You want communities that allow people's sovereignty of moving from one place to another. I would also argue, this is a controversial one, but I would also argue to kind of down the philosophy or foundational philosophy of banishment within culture. This one, we've evolved as a culture with because a lot of what we have in the Western culture is derived from plains people where you could just banish people freely. One thing I learned within studying a little bit is island culture doesn't have much banishment. And they actually have learned to create community because they remove that. So that's kind of like a little fun intention, is when you're creating community, try to make banishment not a pillar. Be innovative and think outside the box. Maybe we create physical space. Maybe we create certain elements that still maintain a community, but still honor people's individuality. And sometimes that comes from like structure. Like a building might need to make some changes. Your environment, the nest, needs to be different to facilitate the sovereignty and individuality of a person. And then sometimes we also have to not make the assumption, this is not a banishment thing. We don't need to make assumption that there's something wrong when someone leaves, or within children and parents. Is there something wrong when a child moves on and goes and has their life? No, that's great. Maybe they stay there till they're 47 under the same roof. And maybe they come back at 96, to the same roof. Allowing free access to enter and exit. Now, exit's the big thing we're talking about here. But whenever we come around and free access to enter is an important thing in the fact that we give ability for a polyculture of people within a community. And so we don't just be very I guess you'd call it orchard mindset. Like we are the, whatever it could be race, it could be like people who are transient, or people are going to stay for the rest of their life. The best communities I've visited honor everyone and create space for people to come in. Now, it doesn't mean that every community should be like facilitating for people with disabilities. Some communities physically can't because of the structure, or because of certain things. And some communities really by the diversity of the community aren't gonna have as much racial diversity. But we create that environment where people aren't, where people have choice, and that choice to enter and exit. I'm actually in the middle of kind of like a little bit of an experimental community. Myself, I always make the joke about benevolent dictators, and I want to honor, like, if someone here is a benevolent dictator, I am. As of like a month ago, I own a house that I pay a mortgage on, that I rent out to certain people who have created intentional community. And so I've done my part to kind of step back and say, I'm the benevolent dictator. I'm not your landlord. I understand that I have a conflict of interest. I'm gonna come visit your parties and such, but I'm not part of the community. I can't pretend like I'm equal. I have a different role, and we need to respect those roles. So understanding the dance of hierarchy and removing hierarchy can be a really big element. That's a long answer to a small question. And any next questions? I have, if none show up really quick, I have a really quick analogy that I think a lot of people enjoy that I share in some of my classes. And I hope you guys can follow this. Sometimes it's kind of hard to follow some of my stories without some foundational things. But I use an analogy when it comes to relating as humans. This is cool with intentional communities or communities, is to kind of create, look at it kind of like a hike. So we're using a hike analogy, and the fact that sometimes at some point people meet. Let's just say we're in the parking lot, we meet and we're like, hey, we're in the same place, like we're the same interest, we're about to climb this mountain here, and you want to hike up just 15 minutes up the trail and have lunch? And the person says, or group of people says, hey, sure, we can do that, and they feel safe. And you ask in a way that's like, great, and you're like, okay. So you hike up the mountain, you're like, oh, this is really good. We really enjoyed having a little picnic. This is, maybe we can do this another time. And so next week they say, hey, a bunch of us are gonna go camping. And we're gonna go camp up on top of this mountain. And we know this really safe place. We saw it when we were having that picnic, and you wanna hike up? And we say, oh yeah, great, let's hike up. So we hike up and we set up a base camp, and everyone's like, oh, this is really nice. Really, we feel safe here from storms and bears and all the other dangers of life. And so we spend the night, and it was all good. And then the next day, people was like, hey, you guys want to take a hike up the mountain a little further? And we hike up the mountain, across some cliffs and things like that. And we have fun, and we come back to base camp. Like, oh, this is good. We're safe. And then later on, we were like, you know what? Hey, we really like that spot a little higher, so we move a little higher. But with the intention, we can always come back down to this base camp. Within our culture, I would argue that we don't follow this analogy of taking a hike. A lot of times within culture, whether it's a dating relationship or a business relationship, or even sometimes we do this with friendships or communities with banishment, is we create a helicopter, like, oh, here we are up on top here. And if you want out, here's the cliff. And so that's a crowbar. And I would say we need to create these flow environments between humans in all these scenarios. So it's not just about a romantic relationship or someone you're sharing a house with or business. It's all of the relationships. And we can apply that to our relationship with the land. We do this so often in permaculture and agriculture. We stop, we make some change, and we find out where our happy place is. And then like today, I made a whole batch of compost tea. Maybe this compost tea really resonates with a certain set of plants, and maybe it doesn't. And so this is my hike. I'm hiking with a compost tea. But within our relationships, creating some of those environments where we can allow a person to step back and stop, relax, and we can be in this place of plateauing together. And if people are part of intentional communities, I offer kind of a consulting service where I can come in and kind of help coach. It's more like a intentional community doula. I'm just there holding space, advocating for people's sovereignty. Every once in a while I act like a midwife, and we kind of like help birth some problems or make a metamorphosis within the community. And so I kind of offer that consulting service, both on individual level, but also on a global community level. And I love teaching this and also other methods of relating, such as in business and such. I speak on those all around. But let's see if we have any other questions here. In what ways do you apply self-regulation and accept feedback? I would say, might sound like a broken record player, is creating pathways of communication. So, and when I normally say that pathway, so you create this pathway. Good example is there's a guy that I met at Earth Skills Gathering. We got to chat here and there. I really feel resonate with him, and maybe we'll do some work together, maybe we'll paddleboard together. It just seems like a good fellow, you know, and I'm really looking forward to getting to know him. And the other day, we really haven't sat around and chatted. We kind of have a similar philosophy, and I actually messaged him. I was like, hey, I would love to open myself up for feedback and comments, clarification, work. Let's open and become a little bit more vulnerable. Well, that's just the first step. The next step is the testing of that. You know, there's a lot of people like, oh yeah, ask me anything, tell me anything. Now I challenge anyone here. You can publicly or privately ask me anything, and it may be hard. And so it'll be the test. Am I really up for feedback? Am I up for a constant feedback loop within a community? And that first time, because you know what, we as a culture, giving feedback is a scary thing. You could lose friends. Disagreeing with someone can sometimes cause so much turmoil. So the question is, when you actually have that moment, this opportunity where someone says, hey, actually, I think, David, what you said earlier, I really feel like you didn't hold space for that person who had a really serious question, and you took it very technically, and you didn't really care about, they just said that, you know, their mother did this to them, or, you know, I talk about some really controversial issues, and sometimes I don't take the opportunity to hold space. And that's been the biggest feedback I've had from people. So yeah, self-regulation. So ways where we receive feedback within community. There's also another, I won't get into the exercise today, but if anyone is interested, I have an exercise about receiving feedback and creating a culture of feedback. I call it story time, and I facilitate that. I can help facilitate that with any community, anywhere, even family. It's really good. We don't call it family meeting because a lot of people have PTSD about family meetings, but it's a little bit different, a lot more fun, a lot more relaxed, and it has a safe space. It's rooted in nonviolent communication, and I love just helping facilitate within people. Even just two people sitting around, we go, let's have story time, you know, let's work this out. And so that's important in feedback within a community. Self-regulation, stopping. It's not always easy for some people, and there's been times that not easy for me, is stopping and being with yourself. It's the best way to self-regulate, is become friends with yourself and be honest with yourself. If what your friends or your community is saying isn't lining up with what you're saying with yourself, it's either your community and you maybe banish yourself and take a hike somewhere, you know, or maybe there's something up with you. Maybe you're not being honest with yourself. So yeah, stopping and being with self and being honest with self and challenging yourself to do amazing things is the best sort of self-regulation. What have you found is, this is from Liza, what have you found is the ideal number of community members to thrive on a size of land? That's a really good question. Depends on the land a lot. Depends on the people too. I would love to talk about different sets of community. Let me just tell, I'll just tell you about one that has a lot of people on a small amount of space. That's one of my favorite, I hate to say favorites, I learned a lot from this community. It's called Sungai. It's in Seattle. I think it's on about 2 acres now. I think they started off on 1 acre, it's 2 acres now. I think they have over 100 people, and it's very close to a metropolitan Seattle area. So it's not like a grow all their own food community, but this community has been around for a long time, and not many people have left. Nobody's been banished that I know of. And when I went and spoke there, I asked them, what's your biggest mistake? And they said, well, diversity. We didn't get a diversity of age. We had diversity of all these other things. But now it looks like a nursing home. A lot of people in walkers. And that's beautiful. And they all sat around on a cloudy day in Seattle singing, it's going to be a bright, sunshiny day. And I had tears coming to my eyes, just how much love and oneness they had. They did that through creating patterns of harmony that honored the sovereignty of each person. And I could speak for an hour about Sungai and some of the things that I learned from establishing their community. So I don't know that there's a silver bullet, but I would say it's not an answer of how many on how much land. It's an answer of stopping and designing, understanding and soaking in the elements and coming up with a solution and being willing to continue to innovate. So Jungle J replied from hell. Okay. How do you deal with the conflict in your situation at home? I struggle with the role of benevolent dictatorship at Beacon Community. A disaster, distasteful but necessary evil, differing agendas, some revealing self-interest. Okay, so the first step, I think, in finding harmony with being the benevolent dictator is two things. One is admitting you are. It's like, all right, I have this role. This is not good. I don't think a good status quo, like, oh yeah, I'm the benevolent dictator, I'm just going to rest in this, is literally laying the pathway for change. Literally continually laying the pathway for the metamorphosis into not being that benevolent dictator. So at least the house, the structure I live under, I have 3 kids 50% of the time. And I work hard to not be a benevolent dictator. I talk about, I try to set things up in a way that I honor each human's sovereignty, but I also communicate that I have a role for this period of time to tend to them. So I try to empower, but also tend. And it's a constant thing, and it's something that within our culture is reality, that we have different roles. Sometimes we within like the best, like within Sangaya, there's people with roles of authority. I think there's a big difference between, not exactly authority, but like role, like a leadership role, and dictatorship. Sometimes there's scenarios where a person has a conflict of interest, a very serious one. Good example is being in charge or responsible for something, or financially invested more than another person, being handed by the community authorship. So those are all elements that you can't always delete right away. But the question is, do we have creating a pathway to do so? And so I would argue there's a lot of communities out there, like the dictators, like, oh yeah, I hope that someday they take. A lot of these communities, their dictator is addicted to control. And so some people don't want to release control. I just argue, it's like, hey, what pathway can we create that can move us into harmony and symbiosis to take away my dictatorship? So my intentional community or ish thing, my rental house that I have, I've actually just created a Word document. It's open to the public. Anyone can come and look at my Word document if they are interested in it. And just a list of things we're all agreeing on. These 3 individuals have freedom to enter and exit any day they want. I also try to honor their privacy and their sovereignty. And so I've just taken a role, and I don't pretend to be a member of the community and equal. I kind of take a role of this dictator. It's like, hey, I dictate some elements within this, and I'm trying to be benevolent within them. And one of those elements of being benevolent is to allow a people to be handed their sovereignty to move forward into owning their own building. I've kind of looked at this idea of like, hey, if this set of people really want to like dance together in community, well, then maybe they can take over the mortgage on the house. Or maybe there's another house that I can be like, hey, you guys have created a great community. Why don't I like coach you guys into like owning a house, and I can just turn this back into Airbnb if the virus goes away. So all those elements are real important for us to dance with. Any other questions that people have? I think we're out of time. We started at 11:11 and we're at 11:55. Liza and Hal asked me to, I didn't know exactly what they meant by have a donation link. I actually don't need any support from anyone. I really don't offer anything other than education. I'll be offering a class. You guys are welcome to buy my class at the Tradition School of Herbalism. I'll be offering quite a few classes there and around the world. As the virus hopefully fades away, I'll be offering a lot more. Those are awesome. I also, if someone's interested in supporting some of the things I do have a Venmo. It's called @PlantATree. You're welcome to throw me any amount of money, and any amount of money that's put forth is put into planting trees for people who don't have trees. So I don't plant a tree in my yard. I plant a tree in someone else's yard that might need a tree that can't really afford it. And I love just showing up and planting trees. Also, if anyone's interested in showing up and planting trees, if we raise some money, I love planting trees and it's fun. We have a little plant tree potluck and we come together. If we could just do that more, just imagine if we all just like once a week threw in $10 and all came together and planted 100 trees. That'd be awesome to come together with such beauty. I'm also, I can take this opportunity for an advertisement. I have actually developed a method of raised garden beds that I'm offering in Gulfport, St. Petersburg for now, but theoretically I'll be offering them all across Florida and then maybe all across the nation at some point. They are lifetime warranted, concrete raised garden beds. They look like terracotta. I install them on site and I can fill them with soil. I can make them any shape and size in the world. And just send me a message and you can find out more about those, or come to either my rental house or this house I have them in, and they will be being installed in the next few weeks at the Tradition School of Herbalism, and their new education facility is going to be amazing. If you can follow them, and also Kelly is the lead permaculture designer. I'm just kind of like the referee and earthworks consultant, kind of overseeing the project. Kelly is an amazing herbalist. If anyone doesn't know her, she's also, I met her through Rising Light at one of their gatherings, I believe, and an amazing designer if you need a permaculture designer that's more versed in herbalism here in Florida. And if you need water flow, I'm your guy, so, or garden beds. So. Thank you all very much. It's been really fun. You guys are amazing. And look forward to seeing you guys around. Don't hesitate to ask any questions, even if they're questions you don't want to post publicly. You're welcome to post them privately. Or if you want to give me a feedback loop publicly, I open myself up for criticism or questions on any topic, personal or not. So thank you guys.